So in this tutorial, I want to cover something that will be useful for the final kind of projects in Unreal Engine. In a few of the unbuilt works, we know that there's some Corinthian columns, and with Corinthian columns, we have a lot of intricate detail at the top. This one, I think, is just from Google Warehouse. And it's a really nice model, but it's very, very large. It's about 250,000 polygons, and you can imagine that if you have, say, 200 columns in the scene, it could get very heavy. Now, it may have no problem. Unreal can probably handle, several million polygons at a time, but I want to talk through a technique to reduce this. So here I'm in Rhino. It's the program I'm most comfortable modeling in, and I imported this object. It's actually a few different meshes here. But then I took a little bit of time and just made a bounding box model. So let's just go to this layer, turn off this, and I can show you in wireframe. It's a very, very simple model. So I built a box, another box. I built a cylinder that kind of started out as a cylinder, and then I actually skewed it so that it was a little bit wider at the base and a little bit narrower at the top. Then I also took some rings, which you can see. If we hide this for a second, you'll see I took some rings that just kind of get the capital of the column enlarging, and then I made a box with some chamfers taken out of it and some arcs to get the top. And when I loft these different elements together, I get a shape that looks like this. It's not quite what the column looks like, but it fairly closely covers every part of the column. And in the 3D model in Unreal, it will look pretty close. So with this, I export the bounding box model, which I just called bounding, as an FBX, and then I jump over to 3D Studio Max. In 3D Studio Max, I imported my bounding geometry, and I also imported the column. And I want to make sure that they line up in the exact same spot. So what I did, let's say I bring in my bounding geometry, I make sure it's the same scale. I can use this kind of quick align tool and say that I want to align it with this column. You can see that the origins are a little bit off. So I'm going to move my bounding box geometry down so that it covers the base. And as always, I did 2 unwraps. So these unwraps are pretty clean. Actually, Rhino did a really good job. It should have no select overlaps. Nope, nothing overlapped. Those are all the different faces. So what you can see right now, if I get out of the unwrap, is right now there's 250,000 polygons in the face, or in the model. But when I select just my bounding geometry, it's only 509 polygons. So now I want to export both of these things by clicking them one at a time. Go export selected. This is my low poly model, which I've already saved, so I'll save over this. Say OK. And it says it can't do some textures, no big deal. Then I'm going to just get my high poly. I'm going to export that. This is my high poly, that's the column itself. It's going to be its own FBX, but I know that these align, so I want to keep the geometry oriented in the same spot. And then I'm going to jump over to Substance Painter. Substance is a program that lets us kind of texture and tile different materials and to work on assets. It's not something I'm overly familiar with, but I'm finding a lot of promise in it. So I'm going to create a new substance painting, select my low poly mesh, and we'll use a 2K texture. So here it'll open up, and there's the column. Obviously it doesn't look all that Corinthian column-like. But over here, I'm able to click Bake Textures, and I'm going to bring in a high poly mesh. So high definition mesh, this is my high poly one. I'm going to set the rear distance to 0.85. So essentially what we're doing is we're setting up kind of a pinging. So normals are projected, and we're going to build normal maps from our high poly mesh onto our low poly mesh. So all the default settings seem fine. I'm sure there's some maneuverability within this that could make it better, but I'm just going to go with this. So we're going to bake the textures from our high poly mesh onto our low poly mesh, and just like that, you can see that our low poly mesh now looks a lot like our high poly mesh. You can see a lot of the detail. It's not perfect. It's doing ambient occlusion for us, so it looks like it has light and shadow. But actually, it's only 509 polygons. So once we get through this, Let's see, it should take a second. There we go. I can zoom around, and if I get in close on the capital, you can see, well, it's definitely not exactly right. And if I built my low poly to be a little bit more particular up here, we'd have much better results. But, from 50 feet away in Unreal Engine, we're going to be okay. Here again, a little bit of a mistake. It's not quite mapping just right, and we have some strange kind of overlap of faces. It looks like there's just a little dirtiness to this. But for the most part, it worked pretty well. If I refine my bounding box in Rhino, it would work even better. So now what I'm going to do is export the textures here. I'm going to go to my desktop, to the column, and we'll select this folder. It's called Material 2 right now, but I'll export. Some warnings, some errors, that's fine. And now I'm going to jump over to Unreal. So here in Unreal, I'm going to load in my low poly. Let's column, there we go. I'm going to load in the low poly, and we'll pull the 3 materials that got baked out of Substance. I'm going to say that we do not want any light maps generated for us, and I'm going to give this a little bit of a scale and import. It brought in our normal map as a normal. That seems good. Let's see if I can drop this. We might need to change the scale of our model. It's really tiny. So let's lock these and increase it maybe 10 times. And we can move the low poly model up into the scene. There we go. So it's sitting on the ground. And now we're going to have to build a really quick texture with the materials we have here. So I'll create a new material. I'll call this the column material. And in the column material, I'm going to press and hold T. I'm going to left click 3 times. This one here is going to be our base material. It's the color. This one here will be our normal. And this one here is a cool map from Substance that is occlusion, roughness, and metallic, all based on different colors. So with this one, occlusion is red, roughness is green, and metallic is blue. You know that because it's occlusion, roughness, and metallic. So occlusion, roughness, metallic are the channels it's using. Our normal map is all of the channels go into normal, and our base color, all of our channels go into base color. We'll say save, and that quick we have all of the normal map baked into this column. So right now it looks low poly, but if I drag and drop this material on, we get a pretty good approximation. So let's throw a skylight just to get some light bounce going on. We'll build the scene, and in a little less than 10 minutes we've been able to take what would be a very high poly model into something that could pass for a Corinthian column in Unreal Engine. Obviously there's be some refinements needed, a few more tweaks, but this is the general technique to get something that has a good level of normal detail without all of those heavy faces. I hope this helps.